Now I want to add my notes and my dimensions. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a dimension. I'm going to first make sure that my annotative text is that I just created is current. My annotative dimensions that I created is just current. And you'll see that under my annotate menu in these ribbons, I have the options for starting to create text and dimensions. So under dimensions, I'm going to click on this dimension button. And what this is this is a straight linear dimension string. So this is for anything that's orthogonal. So if it's straightly vertical or straight horizontal, that's what I'm going to use this for. So I'm going to click on that button. And I'm just going to hit OK for now. Okay, and I'm going to zoom into an area. And this is where I'm going to use my snaps, okay, because I want to be as accurate as possible. So I'm going to snap from one endpoint to another endpoint and bring my dimension string up. Now what happens is this is going to happen the first time that you do this, typically, okay, unless you have experienced this before and you know what you're doing. Now what it does is it looks like it's just a line, okay, but when I zoom in I actually see the tick, and I see the dimension, okay? It's really, really, really tiny, and that's going to be a problem. So this is basically what we have to look out for, okay? This is the second step of creating our annotative notes and dimensions. First step is setting it up. Second step is actually assigning the scale, okay, that it's going to be at. So I'm going to delete this for the time being. Now, if I go to my sheet that I have open, what I need to do before anything is I basically need to determine what my scale is for my drawings, okay, and what they're going to show up as. So I'm going to click on my viewport, I'm going to look below, it's a 1/16 of scale, and I'm going to return to my original modified plan, okay. What I need to do is I need to set up my annotative scale to recognize the notes and the dimensions that are going to be on my 16th inch plan. So in that same spot where I have my list, my viewport scale list, you'll notice that down in the corner here it says 1:1, and if I mouse over it, it's my annotation scale, and it has an annotative symbol, again, that triangular symbol. What this means is 1:1 is full scale. So that basically is setting up all of my notes and my dimensions to be at full scale. So theoretically, what I just put in there, okay, was if my notes and my dimensions were literally at full scale, if that text was literally 1/8 of an inch high, okay? And obviously that's not going to show up with our 16th inch drawings the way that it was showing up there, okay? So what we need to do is we need to set up our annotation scale to recognize the 16th inch, and it's going to do, you know, again, as I said, it's going to do the scaling for us. So I'm going to expand this list. I'm going to click on 1/16 equals 1 foot 0 inches, and now I'm going to add my dimension again. And now you'll see that it's much bigger, okay? And don't worry about the size, okay? You're going to get used to this as you start to work with different scales and different sizes, but this is fine, okay? Again, I'm going to create different layers for these because these should be on their own layers, and I'm going to name this, let's see, oh, I'm sorry, we already have those layers for it, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to make sure that this dimension is on my dimension layer. A plan dims. Okay, so now when I save this and I return to my A2, it should tell me that my external reference has changed. Okay, so I'm going to click on that to update it, and you'll see that it pops up. Okay, and if I do a dimension, do my dimension or distance command, and I go from one point to another, okay, you'll see that it says 1/8 inch, and that's what that paper text height is saying, is that no matter what scale, it's going to figure out what it needs in order to make that text height 1/8 of an inch, okay, in paper space when all is said and done. Okay, and you'll see that it shows up in both of these. So I'm going to just change this really quickly to 1/8 inch. Okay, and it disappears, and we'll see why in a second. So I'm going to return to my modified plan, okay, And I'm going to add, you also have some dimension tools in your home menu too as well. Okay, and I'm going to start to add some dimensions. So I did added linear dimension. Now, if I expand that list, you'll see that there's also an align dimension, and that's the tool that you use in order for you to dimension out and measure any curved walls. Or sorry, not curved walls, walls at an angle. Okay, so I'm going to click on one endpoint of that angled wall, another endpoint, and again, I'm going to make that dimension. I'm going to assign it to my A-plan dims, okay, and I'm just going to save that for the time being. Okay, if I go back to my A2 and I reload my XREF, you'll see that that also shows up, but it doesn't show up here. Okay, and that's the crux of this tool, is that it's not showing up here because these are set up to show up at a 16th inch scale. Okay, if I click on my viewport, that's not a 16th inch scale, that's an 1/8 inch scale. So what we need to do in order for them to show up in this viewport is we need to go back to our modified plan, and we need to change this scale to an 1/8 inch to get the notes and the dimensions that will show up in that viewport. So I'm going to use my aligned dimension again, and I'm going to click on one endpoint and another endpoint and make that dimension. Okay, and again, put that on dimensions layer. Now you'll notice that these, okay, are showing up at different sizes. Okay, that's not wrong. Okay, that's correct. Basically, these, okay, are made or sized for 16th inch scale viewport. This is sized for an 1/8 inch viewport. Okay, and the way that Autocad works with this, okay, and works with scaling is that it zooms in and out. So that means that these dimensions and these text sizes have to be bigger and smaller in order to accommodate that zooming. So if I save it here, and if I go back into my sheet and update the XREF, okay, now you'll see that it shows up, okay, and it shows up here, and it doesn't show up here, okay, which is exactly what we want. And the reason, again, why we modified, or not modified, but set up our dimensions and our text to have that 1/8 inch paper height is that no matter what scale the viewport is, okay, 16th inch or 1/8 inch, okay, no matter what, these text heights are all going to be the same, which is that 1/8 of an inch high, okay, because graphically on the sheet, you don't want text sizes and you don't want notes and dimensions and those sizes jumping in scale, okay? You want it to have one scale and look uniform throughout. So that's what it does, okay? And it sets up to show up in some viewports and not in others. And also what it does is that you're going to have different information from one scale size, okay, drawing scale size to another. And so basically, you know, a more general one might allow for more generalized information, where in details you need to get a little bit more specific, and it allows for that. So that's why we jump in scale when we start to do dimensions, or detailing, sorry, and other types of drawings, okay? If I go back into my plan, by default, okay, these guys are all going to show up at different scales together, okay? It's not... I don't agree with that being, you know, by default, because I think it's a little bit more confusing when you start off and you see it like this and you think it's a mistake, okay? In order to control that, okay, you'll notice that next to the scale, right to the right of it, it shows that annotative symbol and it shows a little light bulb, okay? You'll see that the light bulb's on, and that basically that means that no matter what the annotative scale is, okay, whether it's 16th inch, whether it's 1/8 inch, you know, whatever you have, it's going to show all of them, okay? If I turn it off, it's only going to show the notes and the dimensions that are associated with the scale next to it, okay, which I think is a lot easier to work with. Usually I turn this on to double check some things, but always, you know, I tend to turn it off. So that now if I change my list to a 16th of an inch, you'll see that it turns that 1/8 inch off and it'll show the 16th inch notes and dimensions. Okay, now the reason why we don't have that issue, if we go back to our sheet, is that that's off. Okay, if I turn it on, and if I expand these viewports, okay, you'll see that those will show up. Okay, but what we want is we don't want it to have that jumpiness in the scale size. So we're just going to keep that off, you know, and be mindful that, you know, we might have our notes and dimensions at different scales, but as long as those are off, they're not going to show up. Okay, and keep in mind that if you find, you know, for example, if this is 3/30 seconds, okay, and it's not showing up, okay, that's because we don't have any notes and dimensions set up for 3/30 seconds. So you have to find the scale that those will show up in. So again, I'm going to select that. I'm going to click on 1/8, and it's going to turn those notes and those dimensions off that I have set up for 1/8.